Temperature is in Delhi right now. It's just
right, waiting for YouTube to say you're live.
says that we're now streaming live on YouTube, so
Great.
I am gonna. It is being live streamed. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. Welcome to our June meeting of our integrity conversations at Creating the Future. Oh, I need to change my name from Creating the Future. I'm Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future. It's good to see all of you all today, and let's dive in and just share what's been going on in your lives, in your world. The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever you feel like sharing, whatever's meaningful in your life, what you're bringing in today. What's going on with everybody?
Ooh. What's the start?
I'll go ahead and start. So I was a couple minutes late because I was literally booking a hotel in Ronda, Spain, because my family is going to Portugal and Spain this summer. So very exciting. And with the temperature, well, not that temperature, one of the funny things about the guidebook, we are going in August to Southern Europe, which, yeehaw. And one of the guidebooks, not for Ronda, but for Granada in southern Spain, said, well, in July and August, the streets are peppered with people with sunstroke, but hotels will be inexpensive.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
So anyways, that's my awesome.
Oh, that's very awesome.
Very awesome.
That's very awesome. Just don't be one of those people.
I probably will not be. The rest of my family, I will have to protect.
Oh man, oh man. Well, if we can give you pointers about heat, we're happy to. Oh man. What else is going on with folks?
I will go. Hi everyone. So my husband and I are getting over a little bit of sickness here, but my awesome is that I have finally convinced him to give horticulture a shot in gardening, something very near and dear to my heart, but something that he has kind of left to me. So we're going to a bunch of gardening and planting and herbal free classes that are actually provided by our city here. So I'm really excited. We're going one tonight, which is kind of about healing depression and emotions through horticulture. So I'm excited because that's what I use it for. So yeah, I'm just glad we get to do it together and get our hands dirty, quite literally, and be outside and where it is, rather hot, but it's not Delhi, India. So I'm very grateful for that. And it's wonderful to see you all as well.
You as well. You as well. Who else?
I think John wants to go next.
Oh, no, I was actually waiting on you, Carl. But
I think Carl wants John to go next.
yeah, I felt prompted there. I am contemplating whether or not I will take a trip back east in July to visit some friends who have relocated to the Washington, D.C. area, and maybe touch base with old acquaintances back in Philadelphia. So I'm kind of contemplating how I would do that if I did that. I'm feeling less comfortable traveling on planes today than I did my whole life. And so I'm not sure if I want to try to fly back, but I'm also not sure I can afford or that it would be wise to drive back. So kind of in that process of trying to work through what might be the best way to handle that. My wife is traveling back for her sister's 80th. They're giving her sister an 80th surprise birthday party.
Wow.
So I'll be on my own for about 10 days. So I'm trying to decide what to do with that wonderful slice of time. So I'm not coming to New Delhi for sure. And probably not going to make it to Spain, Justin. but I might make it back to the East Coast. I haven't been there for a few years. I'd like to go back, although again, we talk about temperature, but we also have to think about humidity, right? And that's the thing that probably I don't anticipate is I remember last time I was in Washington, D.C., I ate one of those wonderful Choco Wheel ice cream delights and passed right out on the street. I have a fear if it was the heat, the chocolate, or humidity, but I have a fear of all three now. So we'll see how I overcome that. But I'm actually excited, looking forward to the summer. And I don't know if I told you guys, I did get accepted into my master's program. So I start matriculating in September. I survived the two prerequisite courses. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I'll be homeschooling my grandson. He's a little neurodiverse. And so he's suffered from the pandemic slump, academic slump. So I'm going to try to take this year to get him on some track, hopefully, whatever track. I think he'll actually become an extraordinary student. So I'm really excited about that. So this summer is prepping for those things, is going to school and being to school at the same time.
Wow. Wow. Those are all huge. Each one of those is huge.
Yeah.
And
I'm hoping I can.
congratulations on getting accepted.
Yeah, thank you so much.
There you go.
John,
Right, Carl, you can't escape.
before I do, John, just remind us what's your MA in? Your master's?
Communications. Communication.
Ah.
It's part of the reason I'm here, right? I think everything is all about communication. So, I've done it really well for 50 years. And I thought it would be really nice to go back and figure out why it works now. It's a little bit like I've been listening to the radio for a long time. Now I'd like to go learn how you build a radio. So I just have a curiosity to see how I might become better and why I was so lucky.
Awesome.
Stay curious. That's a good motto, John.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Wilding.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Carl. I'm based out here in the UK, about 20 miles north of London, in a small village called Wheathampstead. Summer appears to have arrived here, which is quite nice because it sort of takes your mind off the big thing that's going on in the UK at the minute, which is we've called the equivalent of your presidential election in November, but ours is going to be on the 4th of July. There was a joke in there somewhere, but I'm not going to make it because that will be deemed as political. But needless to say, it's all pretty depressing stuff. We are being promised the land of milk and honey without any sort of realistic assessment of where we are as a country. And we can have anything that we want. Yeah, we'll cut your taxes, we'll increase your benefits, and no one has to pay for it. Yeah, I probably could go on even more there, but I think you know where I'm sort of coming from. Things all good here, a little bit quieter, sort of in the academic bit of the job. But I just did something very, very nice, which was I had an all too brief visit to Canada, and I went to Calgary for a day and Banff for a couple of days as well, which was just the most mind-blowingly beautiful thing I think I have ever seen in my life. I guess from your nods, you know where I mean.
Amazing.
Wow, Banff is spectacular. Spectacular.
Yeah.
What were you doing in Calgary?
There was a philanthropy conference that I was helping someone with their sort of speeches and sort of all that sort of stuff. So I sort of tagged along for a bit, and yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, probably it's not for today's discussion, but there is a discussion to be had at some point about our sector and major donors and the distribution of wealth and how we engage with that stuff, because it's, well, with everyone watching this or taking point, we all know that our sector is sort of riven with paradox, and I mean, how you sort of engage with that is, I don't know, sometimes feels like it's getting harder.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Very cool though. And that you got to go to Banff is very cool.
You know what was one of my highlights? Sorry, I'm hogging this sort of thing here. There's a pub, if you go on the walking tour of Calgary, there is a pub in Calgary, and the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio is parked up in this pub in Calgary, and it's now a sort of a project for young people. So yeah, all this philanthropy stuff and all these beautiful mountains are great, but I saw the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio.
Now you're talking. Now you're talking. Yeah, philanthropy, blah, 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 but the Stones. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. How about you, Dimitri? I'll switch over here.
Oh, two awesomes. One, Hildy and I took this weekend to finally rest a little bit. We've been like working like crazy for weeks, actually. And Saturday was a complete wonderful serendipity day where we didn't plan anything. We just took off, and whatever looked good, we went in that direction. We did this, we did that. We ended up getting home like at 9 o'clock at night, and had some truly amazing adventures. It was really awesome.
Most people don't think 9 is late.
Yeah, well, when you get up at 4:30, it's really late. The other awesome is we got to see our new little grandbaby on Sunday morning. We do a Zoom call, and what was fun about this was Dad was holding Nicholas and feeding him, and Athena was sort of in charge, and she was sort of running around and building stuff and doing things, and she had like 3 headbands on, and very much in control of who she is and what she's doing, and seems to be better adjusting to the fact that she's not the only one that parents are paying attention to. And I say seems to be because I think it's a relative. She seemed to be at that point in time.
For that 20.
20 minutes, she seemed to be pretty calm. So, but it was very awesome to see them together. And it's always a great thing to be able to connect with them. Thank you, technology. Thank you, Zoom, for at least making that possible, along with all the other stuff you don't make possible. So.
Very awesome. Very awesome. There's just been so much. There's been so much. And actually took last week and just sort of stopped. Just, stuff got done. Probably what most normal people get done in a week is what I got done and thought that was stopping. But it was delightful just because so much good stuff has been going on. And so I'll just mention one work thing, and then the thing, Shanti, that I was thinking of you. Vu and I did a webinar conversation together about 3 weeks ago. And he blogged about catalytic thinking and then invited people to a conversation, and 1,800 people registered.
Wow.
So we had our Zoom account maxed out at 500. We had to live stream it to our website. We then were afraid that the website would crash if 1,800 people showed up all at once at 10 o'clock on. Everything worked. It is at the website. If you all haven't listened to it, it was just delightful. I got to play with Vu for 90 minutes, and that was just really, really fun. And but yeah, it's been that kind of stuff that's happening around here. It's just yeah, I just keep laughing because we're in the middle of working towards the last 3 years of our mission, the last 2.5 at this point of our mission. And I just keep laughing because I've spent the past 6 months putting all these conditions in place for all the stuff that needs to happen. And then I look up surprised that, oh, look, all this good stuff is happening. It's like, yeah. And the other part of that is, oh, this stuff really works. You put the conditions in place and stuff happens. So that was part of it. It's just been really, really pretty awesome. I've been working with Angie on an article that we're hoping will get accepted to a special edition of an academic journal, and just it's really, really good stuff. And then this weekend, and Dimitri mentioned, we were out all day, every day, Saturday and Sunday, and just bounced from thing to thing. We literally were getting gas, looked at each other, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and said, do you want to go down to Tubac for dinner, which is an hour away? And said, okay, sure. And just we loaded up with gas and we headed down an hour away for dinner. And I mean, it was just that kind of delight. And then yesterday we came home and watched the absolute perfect movie. It is called Slay. And it is drag queens vanquishing vampires in a biker bar. It was just, did I not hit it right, Shantine? I thought of you the whole time.
Putting it on the letterbox to watch with.
It is just, oh my gosh, it is just absolute perfect. Perfect. It is just as advertised. It is dumb. It is funny. It is glampy. It is, yeah. It's blood spewing everywhere because it's like ketchup blood spewing everywhere because they're vampires. It's just, yeah. Pick the dumbest vampire movie you've ever seen and the dumbest drag queen. It's like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, found vampires. It was just
my two favorite things, literally.
Yeah. I figured, I thought of you as like horror movies and drag queens equals Shantine. So, and you all know now way more about Shantine than you did.
Exactly.
So, oh gosh. So yeah, we've been having fun, and the work has just been really pretty magnificent. A couple of things that I will share with you in terms of just what has been going on with Creating the Future. We are in the middle of a, pardon me, of a demonstration project with a small junior college in Vancouver, British Columbia, where we are designing a bespoke class for them to share catalytic thinking with all of their faculty. And that's the kind of stuff that's happening around here these days. It's just really, really exciting, and a step into what's next. So yeah, life is pretty good. We are continuing today to talk about hiring practices, and after our last conversation, the one big piece that's missing is the onboarding. We've talked a lot about preparing job descriptions. What would job descriptions look like? What would a process look like of promoting the job, advertising for the job? We've talked about interviewing. What we need to talk about is, okay, so they're hired. What happens from there? And I think we've all experienced, I know we've all experienced bad onboarding. And many of us have experienced good onboarding. So let's just start with what does, and again, keeping in mind that it is not just the employee, and it is not just the employer, but it's everybody else who's going to be affected by this process. It's the existing employees. It is If we were looking at maybe another organization, it would be their entire board of directors, depending on what the position is. It's people in the community, and especially the people in the community. So let's just look at what does an onboarding process make possible? And let's start with the employee, because obviously that's going to be the first, but moving from there to the employer, and then let's talk about what it looks like for the community. What does the onboarding process make possible for the employee?
Well, I guess I'll get started. I think the purpose of onboarding, from my experience, is often not what is accomplished in onboarding. As you've mentioned, we've all had bad experiences, but I actually think that even good experiences tend to miss the mark, because onboarding is about obviously giving the employee some idea of what to expect. Of course, we hope that that's bare minimum achieved. But there's also the goal of integrating the employee into what already exists as an organization. And I think that's usually where the mark is missed, because you come into a new job, you're brand spanking new. You may have a mentor or a guide if you're lucky. And there's a lot to be said about that person and kind of the care the employee, the organization could have for the mentor as well, because they're taking on extra work to help this employee. But you may have that one person, that one point of contact whom you work with more than any other. But a lot of times there's not a lot of integration with the rest of the organization. There's not a lot of time and care taken to explain who the employee is, what their role is, who does what in the organization, and get them acquainted with that. And really making sure that they feel like they're not just the outsider coming in for, sometimes years. I mean, depending on who they are and what the organization is, sometimes you can feel like the new person for months and years. And that's a mistake, I think. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, of course, but we need to make sure that the person feels like they're an integral part of the organization, even from the outset. And like I said, there's a lot of this discussion, I think, about that. But I think, like I said, even in really good experiences, that is not done well.
Yeah. That integration piece is brilliant. Yeah. Because as you said, we do get to know one person quickly. But especially if the organization is large, how it all fits together.
Exactly.
And I've been in situations where the new person is spoken about for months as the new Joe.
That's right.
That Joe left, and Joe was in the position for a couple of years, and this is Claudia. She's the new Joe. Yeah.
And it doesn't feel great, as an employee to be spoken of that way. I remember when I first started in my government job, and one of the things that just boggled my mind is, I would sit in meeting after meeting, and there would just be acronym after acronym. It's the government, right? So everything is acronyms just thrown out. And I just had a notebook full of acronyms. I didn't know, but and I could learn what that meant. But during the meeting where it was kind of relevant, I didn't want to keep stopping it and saying, well, what's, this, what's that? And then I was kind of behind because I wasn't following. And so there's always that need for catch up. And a lot of those things could have been addressed at the outset, just if there's a document that explains it, or somebody sitting down with me and explaining, this is the organization, this is how things look, this is how we interact with other parts. And just making sure that I kind of have just baseline knowledge of those things without having to play catch up, because then you're, like I said, you're missing things.
Yeah.
You're never quite becoming the employee that you want to be until, months down the line sometimes.
Yeah. The acronym thing. Absolutely. Absolutely. What else does onboarding make possible for the employee?
Well, I think to sort of dovetail off of what Shantine was saying, because I think, so I think the outcome is that somebody learns about the organization first before starting to do their work. So there's, that onboarding is first and foremost to the organization, with that sort of being comfortable and confident with what the organization is. And then, I think depending on the size and scope, it's sort of concentric circles. It's like, okay, then it's your realm and what that is. And sort of the last thing is actually the tactical work that you have to do. So I think that sort of staging of, what we're orienting someone to, and kind of another element to that, which is sort of just something to be thoughtful of. You talked about the replacing somebody. So I've always sort of looked at this like the fire hose effect, which is when somebody leaves a job, their workload starts to pile up. And so then when the new person comes in, it's like the expectation is not even to just start doing your work. It's actually to catch up on all of the work that hasn't been done up to that date. So it's like, you don't even really get to a sense of what your job is. You're just suddenly, already in crisis mode right off the bat. So I think as the orienting employer, to really manage that workload transition. I mean, obviously you have to work through the backlog, but again, it sort of goes back to the other piece, which is learn about the organization, learn about sort of the proximal stuff around you, learn about what your job is in the normal. And then come up with a plan of, sort of being very, very intentional and conscious of, here is the workload, some of which is backlog, and like giving grace as well as total transparency around that. Because I do think people come in, so like, this isn't what I signed up for. This is so much more than I thought I was going to have to do. And the reality is, it is, but it could just be episodic, like just getting through that first phase. So.
Wow. Yeah. What else does the onboarding process make possible for the employee?
So, Shantine and Justin have both very eloquently described the importance of onboarding. I think the thing that I might add to it is that I think it can help create a sense of belonging, because all those things that we sort of talked about, I guess there is a danger that that onboarding is about the transfer of information, and onboarding is well, from my experience of sort of helping someone onboard trustees, which I'm not sure was entirely successful, I think we focus so much on getting those people up to speed so that they understood the organization. I think we didn't pay enough attention to whether or not they were socialized within the organization. And this sounds a bit dramatic, but like whether they liked the organization once they got there. I mean, that sort of sense of like, you're not just sort of, well, you're not even just joining a team, you're actually joining a group of people who share your values, and like who actually you might come to sort of respect as friends and colleagues for sort of many years to come. And that stuff has to start somewhere. And I guess at the risk of going on for a bit too much here, you can leave that stuff to chance. You can lead that stuff to sort of like happen naturally, but actually you can also support, encourage, and develop things so that that stuff doesn't just happen by accident, or it happens more quickly than it might have done.
Oh, absolutely. God, Carl, you're bringing to mind years ago, and I may have shared this. I'm getting old and I tell the stories over and over and over again. We had our very, very, very first office manager, Dimitri, and I had just started the company. This is 1993, 1994. This is 30 years ago. And Phyllis was I'm pretty sure we shared with you all that Phyllis was retired and used to read the Sunday ads because she was an HR person. She was in human resources, and just for fun would see what was going on in the world and would read the Sunday want ads. And this was in the days of want ads, so that shows you how long ago this was. And she saw our ad and applied, and she was absolutely wonderful. But she was, you know, probably my age now, back then 30 years ago. And we were no less intense 30 years ago than we are now. We're exactly the same. It is always at a fever pitch. And after the first week, you got this sense that Phyllis was just like, what did I get myself into? These people are crazy. This is too much. I'm too old for this crap, blah, blah. And I picked up the phone on Friday night and I called her at home. And I said, I just want you to know that I know that this week was probably really intense, and we are so happy you're here. And she retired for good, I think 3 years later from us, and told everybody that she was literally about to quit after that first week. So just what you were saying, Carl, just the am I personally supported as a human? And she said, I was absolutely, I knew that I was in over my head. I knew I couldn't do it. And you called and you said, we're good. We love you. We want you to stay. And you just brought that story to mind for me, really, really fresh, Carl. But that human part is what we forget. I'll tell you one more story. Some of you were on the board when Alex Budak was on the board. Alex's wife, Rebecca, works at a fabulous consulting firm in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And I don't know if they still do this, but years ago, they used to, as part of their employee support, each employee had to write what did they call it? An operating manual for me. So this is how I work best. I'm not good in the morning. Don't talk to me before my coffee. If I have my door closed, it's not because I hate you, but I really need to focus. Just those kinds of, I work best when the music is loud. I work best when I can't hear a thing. I thought that was brilliant. And that was handed to every new employee so that you could get to know the people around you. Obviously, I think they also did lunches, that every employee that was around that person was required to have lunch with that person, that with the new person, in the first month or something. There's so many ways that are simple to create that human support. And we just don't do it. You're right, Carl. We focus on the information. We absolutely focus on the information and not the emotional part. I really love that description. Yeah.
And Hilda, you just brought up something really interesting and making me think of all my onboarding experiences. One of the things that I think onboarding does is let you see how the organization works, and hopefully that it works well, but it also can show you that an organization doesn't work well. And first impressions really matter. I mean, how many times have we started a job where that first month or a few weeks, we're thinking to myself, like you were just saying, what did I get myself into? And if I'm an employee and I see that I'm busy and I'm a little bit scared and I'm a little bit intimidated, but I see that the organization is functioning well, that is enough to possibly carry me through. But if I see that the organization isn't functioning well, then my expectation is that whatever I'm going through, which is in that situation likely to be chaos, distress, a hectic work environment, I might expect that to be what I continue with. And if I'm just starting at an organization, I'm not loyal to it, I'm not dedicated to it, that's the time when I'm going to start looking for another job already, right? Because I haven't dug my feet in. There's no sunk cost fallacy at this point. I'm brand spanking new. So, it just reminds me of the nonprofit job that I had where I was onboarded and I was told, 30 days in, we're going to have a meeting. We're going to have a progress meeting. And I thought to myself, well, 30 days is already too far out for you to be checking in with me. We really should be checking in weekly. And so I kind of asked for that, but those weekly check-ins weren't really substantive. They were just kind of like, things going well. Yeah. And, maybe I would bring things up, but it wasn't really a planned discussion. So 30 days comes, there's no meeting, right? It's been lost because I'm doing stuff already. So the promises that were kind of made of checking in with me fell to the wayside because there was an understanding that I was already in it. So why bother? And those types of things made me think this organization is not run well. This is not the type of place where I'm going to be able to flourish because ultimately the important things are being lost. And if they're lost to me and I'm actually asking for it, they are definitely lost to other people who aren't going to ask for it because who really wants to check in with their boss? If you don't feel comfortable with them, you don't want to have that meeting necessarily. You don't want to hear about your feedback. How am I doing? Especially if it's not good. And so if you build that rapport early on, then you don't have to be trepidatious about a 30-day meeting. You can just know that it's coming and you can have those conversations. And hopefully really what that is a check-in to make sure the things you've already raised are happening the way that you want to see them. And that 30 days is just a confirmation of those things. And you then can see this place works well. I might be stressed out because I'm brand new and I don't know what I'm doing, but I see, John, I see, Dimitri, I see other people already doing the job well and they're happy. So I can expect to be in that position at some point. But if you don't have that set up, then I can tell you, you're going to be on, your play's going to be on the line looking for something else pretty quickly.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. John and then Dimitri.
Yeah, for me, two things came to my mind. Early in my career, I worked in marketing for the Bell system when it was only one phone company for the world. And so the word that they taught me early was cognitive dissonance, right? That, you buy these phone systems and then you decide, what was I thinking and why did I do this? I think we have to intentionally address that with the existing staff because they all are like in a situation where they've got this new boss. And I think a lot of times when we talk about onboarding, we think of it from the perspective of the incoming person. But I think you also have to think about it from the perspective of all of the customers, all of the staff, all of the stakeholders who are all suffering a certain degree of disconnect and discomfort. And I think too often those things, because they don't get addressed, they become those things that make it much more difficult. And it's a rough kind of unlubricated entrance. So I think we have to lubricate that a little bit with some intentional, give us some feedback, talk to us a little bit about, how you're feeling about this change right now. I think we don't get, and then share that with the incoming people so that they can intentionally address it. I think that's really important. And then the other thing that came to my mind, and this is interesting for me, maybe it's just part of my very introverted personality, but I just needed like an hour without anybody bothering me every day when I first started. I just needed a minute to kind of get my head space right because I was processing a lot and at the same and not just about the job, right? I was processing with John, why did you do this, you silly person? And I needed enough space and time without it being, because there's a tendency based on, again, what Justin was talking about, to feel like there's the to-do list is already filled for the next 22 years, right? I'm just stepping into the job. So you have to kind of be able to create a space, a safe space where you can, and I really would encourage people, take a walk, do something, make sure you go out to lunch alone once, or go to breakfast, or take a coffee break, do something alone, so that you just have enough space to let yourself hear yourself talk in the process. Because I think sometimes we fill up the onboarding process with so many things, and then there's all of the new things that go with the job, and then there's all of the things that you thought you had gotten rid of that are really not yet out of your life. It's just you just need a space. You need a liminal space where you can step in and take a couple of deep breaths and be mindful. And I think building that right into the process is important. And then the last thing I was going to say was, and it really wouldn't hurt to get a coach, mentor, whatever you want to call it, to just be a part of the process with the person, so that they get some kind of guidance and support. Because I think, again, you hired them, they really sold themselves probably a bit much, even, right? A little over the top, right? I mean, we're all perfect in a job interview. And now I have to come to terms with, so now I really have to perform like a hero because I've sold myself as this hero. And I think giving them a little bit of external, kind of unbiased um, support is also going to be important.
Yeah, well, you're making me think about the fact that not just onboarding processes, but so many work processes are skewed towards extroverts. And I'm like you, I'm a slow thinker. I need to process. I get very, Dimitri and I talked about the fact that we went this weekend and did all kinds of stuff. One of the things we did was we went to the Arizona Historical Society. We hadn't been in many, many years. We wanted to see, what history, how they're talking about it has changed. And it's a brilliant, brilliant place. And I was on overload after maybe the second exhibit, and Dimitri could have stayed there all day long. He just needs as much information as you can pull in. And after about 2 exhibits, I so recognize you, John. I was just like, can I just sit quietly in a room and just think? There was a wall with these beautiful biographies of sort of unknown folk that were brilliant. And they were floor to ceiling with a picture, and there may be 10 of them. And I read 2 of them. And I was like, if I read more of these, I don't know what I'm going to do with all that information. I can't handle, I want one person's life and I want to think about it. And there are people who are just the opposite. There's the Dimitris who need to see all of it, and it wasn't enough. And he would have spent all day reading all of it and every word. And I think probably that whole, the operating manual for you, I think probably one of the things that we need to know when we're hiring someone is how do you operate best? We don't have, maybe it's not, we don't have an onboarding process, but we have a fluid onboarding process that you can pick and choose, that you can you know, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that maybe one of the conditions for success is that it's not a one size fits all, because we're not one size fits all humans. So yeah, thank you for that, John. That just like brought right to me. Yeah. Dimitri.
Thanks, Sylvie. Actually, John, one of the things you were talking about is something I had been thinking about, and also sort of a combination of, you know, what everyone has been talking about. But one of the thoughts that popped in my mind early on was the idea of apprenticeship. What is apprenticeship? What does it do? Well, it gives you a mentor. It gives you someone to show you the ropes, so to speak. So from the employee, the future employee's perspective, they're grounded. It makes me think about, I have a job description, and the job description is really that you're looking for a widget, you know, that can fit all of these components, and everyone is different. And it may be best for everyone, the employer best, if you don't fit all of those, because you may have a component of who you are that is like gonna rock the nation, you know, in terms of what this situation requires. But if all you're looking for is just that box, that, you know, the person, you have no way of knowing that, and the person is not necessarily encouraged to be that. You know, over the years, I've worked with people who surprised me with some talent or skill or interest or whatever that is nowhere near on the surface, and yet was so powerful in terms of the work that I was doing at the time, and the things that we worked in. So yeah, and the other thing that does, having a mentor or apprentice, is there's someone to go to that isn't waiting for the weekly meeting or the monthly meeting or whatever. I just have a quick question. Why is there never toilet paper in the bathroom? You know, oh, you're supposed to bring your own. I wish I'd known that, you know, whatever. But, you know, without being too silly, there's lots of things like that, that if you could just feel comfortable to ask the question, it could avoid the thing that you were talking about, John, which is, God, have I made a mistake? Am I in the wrong place? You don't even have someone to ask that question to.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing with that Shantine was mentioning with the acronyms, which is why we don't abbreviate CTF, which is why we always say and write out creating the future. Yeah, absolutely. Shantine.
Yeah, the mentorship thing, I think, is so important. It's not just lip service to have a mentor. That person needs to really be involved. I think also the employer needs to check in with the mentor, so it's not just an island of information. You know, that feedback loop, I think, is important, where the mentor can share, you know, with the employer what this person's going through, and not in a, you know, ratting them out kind of way, but more just, you know, hey, I've learned that this person is a little more introverted, or I've learned that they really need a moment to think after I give them information. And it's important to have that feedback loop, but it's also, you know, you let the employee know that feedback loop is going to exist, is really critical. And the most successful mentorship relationships that I've seen, and when I worked for the government, it was, I think they did it really well. One of the things they did really well was, my boss, you know, it's not ever going to be perfect, but she did her best to find a mentor she thought I would get along with, that I would have a rapport with, and not just the next person in line to be a mentor. And what it meant is that some of us were repeat mentors, and some of us maybe had one, but, you know, I had several that people that I mentored coming in, because my personality kind of jived with them, or we were interested in similar things, or, you know, it wasn't about profiling, but hey, it was another woman who was around my age from the same place, you know, it just kind of worked out well. And I think that was really effective. And I saw when we had another boss who didn't do that, who just kind of said, well, you're next in line, you're a senior, you're next in line, so the next person comes in is with you. And that relationship never developed. And so then the employees still needed other people to talk to because they didn't feel comfortable with that mentor. They didn't actually feel like they were getting much out of it. And frankly, the mentor didn't really want to do it. So the thing to look out for there is that we're not putting more work on just one person or that they feel singled out to always be responsible for onboarding new people. But at the same time, I loved it. Like for me, one of my favorite parts of the job was teaching a new employee all the things that I wish I had known. So I was always raising my hand for it. And there will be people who are like that. And, give them that chance, give them the opportunity. There are also people who will shy away from it. And I think that's okay too. But it's just so critical to have, as much as we can, a foundation that suggests some kind of cohesion there. It may not always work, but if we can look at that foundation and say, these people are likely to get along beyond what's just in the workplace, I think those are always the best relationships that I saw and made actually for the most successful employees there. The other people who didn't, they left. They left quicker because they didn't feel like they had a bond. They didn't feel like they had somebody. And kind of without fail, actually, those were the people who were first out.
I mean, studies have showed over and over and over and over again that it's the connection to the people at work that makes us happy at work. Money helps, but there are so many times, and I've seen it. I think we've all seen it, where the money's really good and you leave anyway because it doesn't feel right. It's crossing boundaries. It's whatever it is. We've all heard people say, you know what, you couldn't pay me enough to stay there. Which is, that's beyond onboarding. That's into organizational culture entirely. But so far what I'm hearing in what the onboarding process makes possible for the employees is first and foremost that they feel safe. They feel supported. They feel like they belong, like I may not belong now, but I have the sense that I will belong. That they learn the job, they learn the stuff, they learn the pile that Justin pointed out they may be stepping into. They also learn the culture. They learn the organization as a whole. And that they feel confident, not just in the job, but feel confident in the organization, that this is a place I'm going to want to contribute to. This is a place that is run well, or that I can see where I fit in the organization. So it's the personal, emotional support, sense of belonging, sense of confidence, feeling safe. It's the job itself, learning the job, and then learning the culture and the overall organization. Is there anything else that it makes possible for the employee?
I don't know if this so much is what you do for the employee, but maybe what the incoming person can do for you is a lot of this has been going one way, right? So at some point you need to tell people where you are and where you're coming from in the onboarding process, because you need to kind of be clear in your mind a little bit on, every time somebody starts working for me, I buy them this book, The First 100 Days on Your Job, right? I buy them that book only because it says, okay, so for the first 30 days, what are you going to do? And just, I want them to think about that. I don't care what they want to do. I just want them to have thought about, what do I want to do? And I think too often it's kind of everybody's throwing everything at this person, but I don't always know if they get a chance to express who they are and what is important to them and why that's important, because it almost makes me like have to put on the shoes somebody bought for me rather than see if the shoes actually fit my feet. And so we have to build into that process a way for them to say, I'm looking forward to fewer meetings or or more meetings, whatever it is, so that people can start to prepare themselves for the change. Because I think we make it like that person has to fit our culture, and actually that person is going to shape our culture along with us. And we have to, and it goes back to that belonging thing, because that's the difference between being there and belonging there.
I think that leads really, really nicely into what does an onboarding process make possible for the employer? And obviously, if you've got an employee that comes up to speed fast, okay, that's the easy one. That's the gimme. What can an onboarding process make possible for the employer? And part of what you were saying, John, that made me think about that is that helps me know as an employer, that helps me know what to expect from the employee, and how I can support them. I mean, it is, as you said, it's two-way. I can't know how best to support you if I don't know you. And in the beginning, I don't know you. Yeah. What else? What does the onboarding process make possible for the employer?
I'll jump in here. Hiring is an expensive business, and it's a fraught business for both sides. And I don't particularly enjoy talking in the language of risk, but there is, a reasonably high risk that that this period, this transition point, or to use John's phrase, this liminal sort of space, that it goes wrong. So a good onboarding for the employer, actually for the employee as well, maybe, is that it de-risks actually what is quite a sort of a difficult period. That sort of George Bernard Shaw quote about communication, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Onboarding is about sort of like trying to make sure that you don't sort of make that mistake and the consequences of sort of that mistake. So it's interesting, isn't it? Is that you might approach something like onboarding in terms of time and money and sort of think, no, we haven't got time for that, or we just want to do a de minimis sort of experience. And actually spending more time on it now might reduce the risk that you have to spend even more time doing other things that you don't want to do later on.
Like hiring the next person.
Yes, exactly.
Seriously. Yeah. How many times are we 6 months in and we say, really? Why didn't anybody tell me that? Yeah. What else? What does it make possible for the employer?
So I think it's kind of double-edged. I mean, I think it all should be double-edged actually, in terms of, there's always interplay between whatever the employer does and affecting the employee, et cetera. But I think I mentioned this early in one of the meetings. One of the interesting things that I was kind of playing with when I was advising clients was sort of, what is an onboarding period? What does it mean? Is it the first day you're there? Is it the first week? Is it the first year? What are we even talking about in terms of onboarding? I think the most successful ones that I saw was onboarding that was conceptualized as a 30 to 90-day period. I don't think there's one size fits all, but just the idea that people may need a week, may need longer, but what are we doing in that period as well? So for the employer wants to obviously get the person up to speed so they can start working. That's the whole goal. Along with all the other things that we've talked about, which again, I don't think most organizations are considering, which is integration and belonging and safety and all of those beautiful things that we hope are included. But how do we get there? And what are we actively doing in that period? Because an employer might say, well, I have a packet that I'm going to hand to them, and that is my onboarding packet, and you read through it, and then you sign your name, and once you sign your name, you've told me you've read through all of it, and you understand all of our policies, and that's it. How many of us have actually read through the employee handbook right away? Even if you sign it, I will tell you, as somebody who did a lot of supervisorial training in law enforcement, that most people don't read those things and are very surprised to hear that, on page 12, there's something there that's very relevant to what they may or may not be doing. And that's why they're now in trouble or need a performance plan or whatever it happens to be. So the employer and the employee both, I think, need to know, what is the onboarding period? What do we consider that to be? What's the goal of it? Are there milestones that we can expect or anticipate from the sort of no size, one size fits all, no size fits all? What would work best for the employee, right? Do you need a weekly check-in? Do you need a monthly check-in? Do you need maybe we can't do a daily check-in, but maybe you still want to tell me that I want a daily check-in for the first week or whatever it happens to be, or with the mentor. So I think just that fundamental question of, what is the onboarding? How long is it? How long do we want it to be as an organization? And do we treat people differently throughout that process? If we know that someone is here and there's a 90-day onboarding / potentially even probationary period. I mean, is that part of the onboarding as well? What do we do during that period, and how do we react to people in that period? Does it create a culture too, is another thing to look out for, of not really talking to that employee honestly about what's going on in the organization because we're afraid of either scaring them off or giving them too much information or being too real with them. Is there someone in the organization who tends to be a little too real sometimes and can kind of color somebody's perspective of what the organization's all about? I mean, there's so much to think about, but I think it just comes down to, what is the onboarding? What does the employer need to do in that period to make them an effective employee, and how long does that theoretically take? And we can always change that, but I think it's definitely more than a day. It's definitely more than a week. At a minimum, it's 30 days to just set things to do. And it may just be meeting with them every week, but we need to have some construct of what that process and that procedure is, or else it's kind of meaningless, or else there's nothing there to really do.
You've got me thinking, and then John and then Justin. What I learned when my mom passed is that the grievance counseling that comes after hospice is 13 months. And it's 13 months because you've gone through every one of the anniversaries, you've gone through the birthdays, you've gone through everything, and it is 1 month after you've gone through everything. And I found that to be so, I found everything about hospice to be so human. It's like the only part of the healthcare system I've ever seen that is so human. I'm not sure why we have to wait until we're dying to be human with each other, but that 13 months, it's just what you brought to mind, Shantine. A week, a month, okay, but the annual meeting is in July and I'm getting hired in January, and but this is what we always do. Yeah, but I don't know that. Yeah, that's wow. I never thought about that. Thank you, John, and then Justin.
Well, good news. You just said what I was about to say. When I got hired for one position. There was only one other Black person in that position in our company. And he said, John, I want to give you some advice. He says, you will have to stay for 2 years to figure this job out. He said, and if you leave in less than 2 years, I will punch you in the face. So I felt very motivated by that. Still a good friend of mine. But I think you touched on what I was thinking, which is there's a life cycle to a job, and you have to go through not just the first period, that first 12 months, because that's where you find out what's really going on, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen in December when the holidays come. What happens in our company when the holidays come? What happens in our company when the summer comes? What happens in our company? So you have to experience all of that. And then the second year almost is now, okay, so based on what I think I learned from the first one, I'm going to try this. And then I need to recognize that I got a 50-50 chance there, right? I might be right and I might be wrong. So the 2 year thing was really, it has become very kind of basic for me. So when you talk about the onboarding, I think that is the period is going, it's kind of ongoing for at least that long, at least that long. And the other thing is there are other factors that will influence that. Like if you have to bring on someone new, or if a new program comes on board, every time you introduce some new factors that may not have touched on areas that you already experienced, you almost need to go back to, so this is like a new job for me. Now I have this new wellness center I need to be responsible for. And I almost have to go through an onboarding to decide, do I want to be part of this thing with the new wellness center and how am I going to deal with it? So I do think it's an iterative process in a very strong way. But it also means that, the old situational leadership thing where it talks about, there's directing and coaching and, and delegating and that kind of stuff. You almost have to recognize every time you hit a new occurrence in this job, you're going to need to go through that curve. And you touched on something I thought was very important, Shanti. I need to know who can I talk to about that. So it's not okay, we onboarded and it's done. It's you know what? This just happened. Who can I talk to the board? Somebody on the board about this? Is one of our stakeholders? Who do I talk to about this? Because, it's new job to me because I didn't experience before. And I think that's important because it keeps you out of the place of being frustrated that I gotta know, like somehow I have to know everything. And I think when you don't feel like that, good news to my friend Joe, he, because I was going through that, I could go to Joe. I could say, hey, Joe, you've been doing this now this is your 6th or 7th year. What happens when you hold a conference and nobody comes, And he could say, well, here's what you do. You turn it into something else. And so, who can you talk to? And I think that brings one other thing, which is who is in a situation like yours, maybe not necessarily in this space, that you can go to. For me, again, when I started my career again 50 years ago, I went to a meeting in Washington, D.C. that was held by the United States Postal Service for young Black professionals. And they said, hey, as a young Black professional, you are going to become a representative for all Black people, whether you like it or not. So get over it. And so now that I've gotten you to get over that, know that if you mess up, it's going to reflect on every one of us. So you need to recognize that. And we're going to tell you some stuff here today. And I walked away with a 2-inch thick notebook, workbook of all of this stuff that went with being a representative of a people. And that was really very helpful because it helped me to, go into territory. It's like you are going to face, like when people talk about microaggressions, or you're going to face, people are going to have meetings and you're going to conveniently not be in those meetings. These are things that just come with the territory, and being able to know that. So I think it's the internal side, but I also think a part of this has to be, what's the wisdom in the village that can help us. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk that long.
Oh, it was fabulous. Thank you, John. Thank you.
That's okay, John. I appreciate it because I think you were kind of queuing up something that was percolating for me around, ultimately we want our staff to be fiduciaries of the organization. And when I say that, I mean not financial fiduciaries, but fiduciaries of the values. So integrity partners. Obviously that is a bias, but I think particularly within the creating the future, that is our bias. Like we want everyone to be that integrity partner. So I think the benefit to the organization is that they have someone who quickly can step in and be comfortable and confident as an integrity partner. I mean, and John, what you were sharing, like, I understand your situation and structural elements, but we want staff who can come in and say, that's bullshit. Like this is not who we are based on what I've been told we are. And so I think, thinking about what it means for the employer or for the organization to be able to accelerate that level of confidence of people being able to play that role, since it is so fundamental to an organization, and that it's not just your overconfident people who are stepping into that. So really ensuring that we have that comfortable that comfort, that confidence, and the permission that we're setting up. So thinking about orienting people to those issues and instilling them with the appreciation that those are the paramount responsibilities that we have collectively.
Yeah. I mean, that goes, we talked about the emotional well-being, and we talked about the knowing the stuff. But the values being a big part of the stuff is tremendous.
Well, and the culture too, which is
right.
Who's going to see culture misalignment, any more clearly than someone who comes in fresh. They're going to say, you got rhetoric over here, and what I'm experiencing is this over here. And so, I mean, in some ways, it's like that person is actually primed better than anyone else to really help identify points of strong alignment and points of misalignment around the culture and values.
It's the little kid in the emperor's clothes. Yeah. Huge. I'm scribbling before I forget. What then does the onboarding process make possible for all the other employees?
One of the things, it's kind of cynical, but it's true, is if I'm an existing employee, I'm thinking, does this person help my workload? Does this person help my effort? Does it make it easier on me in any way? Does it make it harder? if I'm taking on a mentorship role or an informal mentorship role, is that more work on top of the work I already have? Or are they going to be helping me? Are they going to be assisting with my workload? So I think one of the things that, I frankly think is always missed, is the employer, the organization having discussions and priming employees to say, we're interviewing. Okay, so first of all, we're interviewing, which means that my time as your boss is going to be divided. And this is how it's going to be divided. This is how that's going to affect my ability to supervise or whatever it happens to be, because it takes a lot of time. There may be a opportunity in just having that conversation of saying, you senior folks here, I'd like you to be involved. I'd like you to help me look at resumes, or I'd like you to help me sit in those interviews. But guess what? If you're sitting in interviews, you're going to have less time to do your job day to day. And I spent, whenever I was at doing interviews, which I did a lot of because I really liked doing them. I liked having a say in who we brought on board. And I liked being a part of that process, but it meant that I wasn't going to be able to be in my office doing whatever it happened to be. And so, as much as I enjoyed that, there were definitely others who didn't enjoy it, who also were still kind of pulled in as part of the interview process, kind of their duty as a senior person in the office to be a part of it. And then a lot of times the conversation stopped there. What is that person then going to be doing in the office? Can I set aside, for my work, it was law. So do I have cases, literal case files that I can pass to them? Or am I going to be needing to have them, shadow me on these cases? What are going to be the things that I need to do as an employee? What can I expect? So that I'm not annoyed, because the other side of this is when I was representing government employees in lawsuits against those former organizations would be, folks saying, I was a senior person in the office and I always was the person who had to take my time to let them shadow me on cases, which took longer time. And I couldn't get my work done, but I was good at it. So I kept having to do it. And they never told me that I would, so I couldn't plan that this was going to be something that I needed to do. And I also didn't feel like I had the voice to say to my boss, I'm swamped because I'm doing the work that I'm doing, but now I'm also helping this other person get on up to speed. And I can't do all of those things, and you don't want to be seen, if you're an employee, you don't want to be seen as somebody who can't handle that. I never did. I wanted to be like, no problem, until then it's a problem, right? Then I've got 3 cases in court and I literally can't help this person. And then I feel bad. So I think just the transparency with employees is so critical. And then giving your employees that avenue, that space, when you say, if it's too much, if mentoring this person or whatever it is too much, we need to be able to have that conversation. I don't expect you to be their boss. You're not their boss, unless you are, but you're not their boss. So your role is different. So, you don't need to be the person who is editing their work before it goes in, or maybe you do want them to do that, but there needs to be transparency there. And there needs to be an expectation of what those roles are, so that the employees aren't feeling like they've now got 2 jobs and they're helping somebody. And that can create a lot of resentment. When I was in my job and we knew that somebody was coming in who already had 10 years of legal experience, but then they came in and they didn't know anything about how we worked. They might be a great attorney, but they feel like a brand new person out of law school. And that can create resentment when you're like, you've done this for 10 years, you don't know how to do blah, blah, blah. Well, no, of course they don't necessarily know how to do everything, but we don't want to create that environment where it already is going to set us up on a really kind of cynical, depressing, resentful path, because that is what tends to happen, unfortunately, in a lot of situations.
Wow. Yeah, your experience is just so invaluable. It's like you've been on both sides of this and
Yeah.
suing them for not having been on one.
Yes, that was the more perhaps valuable experience because then you could see how these things affect people who aren't you. Because I know how I deal with things and I know that I can maybe take things on more and more, but to sort of everyone's point, John's point especially, that everybody is so different. And where I felt really happy to share work product with a new employee and say, here's, a legal brief I wrote, take it, run with it, copy it. I don't care if it wins your case, fantastic. There's a million other attorneys who are like, that's my work. I'm not giving that to other people. Why am I doing that? And I honestly had not thought of that when I had talked to one of my friends who said, I'm always giving them my briefs and they're copying it. I'm like, well, yeah, of course you do. That's what you do. And she was like, no, that I spent time and worked really hard to do that. Like, I feel it doesn't feel good to me. And so just recognizing that like what you think is something that everybody wants to do and is so great and valuable as an employee is not necessarily how everybody else feels about it was really a huge awakening for me on sort of the other side when I started working on the other side of these things.
There was this wonderful little book that was published maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago. And it's like communication styles, communication tips for I think it was for couples. I don't remember, but it was called The Usual Error. And what they dubbed as the usual error was, I think you're thinking what I'm thinking. And I just, that has always stuck with me. I don't remember any of the tips at all, but I just loved that phrase. The usual error is that I think you're thinking what I'm thinking. And how much of our systems are all set up around that is I think you're thinking, I think you're feeling what I'm feeling. Yeah. Yeah. What else can the onboarding process of a new employee make possible for the employees into which that person needs to fit in? For all those others. So if they're in a team of 10, what does the onboarding of the one make possible for the other 9?
Well, I think I'm summarizing all of what Jantine had in her is just people feel like they have a partner in that new person.
Mm.
And maybe we qualify it, a constructive partner.
I think it can also be an opportunity to rejuvenate is not the right word, but bring the mission forward for everyone else again. Remind people why we're here or what we're doing, so that in the process of onboarding somebody else, we have to think about all the things that we're telling them or working with them or whatever, and the fact that that applies to everybody else. So everyone else can say, oh yeah, that's right. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. That's why this is happening. And it's sort of like a refresher course for everybody else for the organization and the mission and what you're working on.
That is such a good point, Dimitri. I mean, you just really brought to mind something that I experienced a lot, which was particularly when I was in federal law enforcement. You get really down sometimes on the practice, and because you're seeing a lot of dark stuff, and whenever we would have somebody new come in and we would explain to them why we're doing these things, it was like breathing new life into me sometimes. And I felt proud again, to do what it was that I was doing, because it's so easy for old employees to lose sight of those things. And so I find that such an incredible point, because it's probably what kept me doing that job for so long. Was, not having high turnover is not great, but the good part of that high turnover was that reminder of being able, when I was mentoring a new person, to say, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is why it's fun to do this sometimes, and here's why it's hard, but we do it for a reason. just I mean, I think that's such a strong, important point.
Yeah, you're both making me think about, we take time to nurture people in onboarding, but we then don't take time to nurture them forever. With that same, we want a new employee to be excited to dive in and we just figure everybody else, this is just your job. But there's something about, is it onboarding or is it ongoing?
Probably
And
both.
and what does that look like? Yeah.
I'm gonna say one more thing. We also should give people a chance to recognize maybe this is not the place for them anymore. Because I think too often we assume that we're gonna go play with the same team. And I think if we look at sports as an example, we trade people all the time. We get new people into the story all the time. And I think too often we don't ask people, do you want to continue on the journey where we're going? And I think when I was listening to you and you were talking about, some of the hardships of being in law enforcement, it's like this is a chance to say, maybe it's time for me to start thinking about my family. Maybe it's time for me to, look. So I think one of the opportunities that can come out of bringing this new person on board is just an honest opportunity to look at, is this still where I want to be, where I still want to go? Because I think too often we're just there because we're better the devil I know than the devil I don't know.
Inertia.
Hi, Angie.
See if she pops back in. Hello, Angie. We are talking about the onboarding process, and we've talked a little bit about onboarding, what it makes possible for the employee, what it makes possible for the employer. And now we're talking a little bit about what the onboarding process makes possible for all the other employees who are not new. So speaking of onboarding, are you in an airport right now? You're speaking of boarding.
Yeah, I'm in between flights. Hello, everyone.
That's
Hello,
the
Angie.
dedication. We're happy you're here. So what else? Let's think about what we've been talking about with specifically for other employees. Is that if first and foremost, Shantine said the first thing people care about is this person going to help my workload? Is this person going to be part of this team? And we talked a lot about people feeling like the existing team feeling like that person is going to help, is going to be part of the team, is going to be a partner in the work. And then we talked a lot about the fact that the onboarding process, especially if a former an existing employee is part of that onboarding process, is a way of sort of rebreathing life into that existing employee as, oh yeah, this is why I'm here. This is why this work is important. Because we do get so lost in the doing when we've been doing it for a long time, that we sometimes lose track of the why. What else are you guys thinking about in terms of, for the existing employees, what does the onboarding of that new employee make possible for all the rest of the people on the team that have been there?
So there's an element, sorry, Carl, I'll be quick. I mean, I think, again, to some of what Shantine was saying in my comment earlier about that work pile up that happens in the vacancy, just sort of an understanding of how that's shifting, because obviously it's the teammates who are often taking on pieces. So giving them a way to graciously sort of offload some of that burden, but again, not dump it on the person, but like figure out like, how that negotiation of work can happen well. That was there. The other thing, which, is, I mean, one, it speaks to just the hiring of someone, but also the bringing on, I think it can demonstrate to all of the employees the commitment to properly staffing an organization. I mean, so much of what the reality is for, I think, so many organizations, nonprofit, for profit, is people are overworked. And so bringing in more labor is a recognition of you are doing too much, and we are staffing up to ease the burden, to better distribute, to allow everyone to be more balanced and, in my opinion, probably more productive. But I think that so it's not necessarily the onboarding that's tied to, but just, the commitment to bring people in and to bring them up to speed so that they are contributing and taking on, that distributed labor burden that exists, I think can just convey to people that, yes, we value your time because we are staffing up appropriately for the work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Carl and then Dimitri.
This is all incredibly positive. Just my slight sort of just sort of thing that I think we have to watch out for with something like onboarding like this is that one of the risks, I think, with onboarding in terms of what it makes possible for the rest of the staff is that it makes it possible for the rest of the staff to not change. It makes it possible for the rest of the staff to sort of incorporate the new hire into their way of doing things. And that can often be good because, like, we talk all the time here about values and how getting people with the right values is incredibly important. But like sometimes as organizations, we do get a bit staid, we do get a bit stuck in our ways, and the onboarding process might be an opportunity to try and stop somebody from giving us the shake that we might need from time to time, and so on. So I guess what I'm sort of saying here is that it's absolutely the right question about what onboarding can and cannot help people to achieve. But there are then follow-up questions, aren't there, about what's the nature of onboarding? What do we mean by onboarding? Are we onboarding people's values? Are we onboarding people into our working practices? And do we need to ask ourselves before we onboard people, actually, what do we want to achieve from this? Do we want someone who's just going to help us to continue as we are? Or actually, do we want an onboarding process where we are going to be challenged a bit? Because we might the purpose of our hiring might have been because we feel that we need some new direction or some new way forward. So I guess all of what I'm sort of saying is that these very good questions about onboarding, but we need to ask ourselves before we start the onboarding process, why did we hire this person? Because the onboarding process should be about helping us to achieve that goal.
Huge. Absolutely huge. Thank you. Dimitri.
Carl, I had to smile when you were making that last comment because you started out by talking about basically the onboarding ends up being an indoctrination into the old ways for the new hire. This is how we do this or whatever. And my comment was going to be onboarding also gives the opportunity to bring fresh ideas, which you then went into, and new perspectives and new ways of doing things that can challenge that staid, this is the way we do it approach with, potentially something fresh and something that's exciting for the existing staff. So there is an opportunity in that to bring the life experience, the work experience, or whatever of the new person, basically, and bring it to the table for everybody else to be able to participate with it.
Very much so. Very much so. In the short amount of time that we have left, I want to ask one more question and then we'll pause for reflections. And that is, the whole reason that community organizations exist is for the community. So what does the onboarding process for a new employee make possible for the community?
So I think that's an incredible question. And I think reflecting on particularly my experience in the nonprofit space, one of the things that I really love doing, but I think isn't always done right, is meeting the community, right? And being a person who is sort of shepherded into these traditional spaces with the community as a new representative of the organization, and how that is done, and making sure that that is part of the onboarding process. So, for example, in my, I won't name names, but in one of the nonprofits for which I work, we had a community event, which was very much in line with what we did. It was other organizations who kind of did the same type of thing. It was the mayor's office. It was a whole ordeal, and wonderful. Community came. I was brought along as, a new director, and I kind of left to my own devices. I mean, I was there with the organization CEO, but I wasn't really introduced to people, and I wasn't really given that opportunity to meet other people in the space. I wasn't given, even before going, I wasn't even told what this thing was. It was kind of, I knew what the name of it was, but what was going to happen there. And so when I went, it was wonderful in the sense that I'm fairly extroverted. So I just went and talked to people and kind of learned what was going on, and spoke with folks in the community. But they didn't really know who we were. I didn't really know what the politics were behind some things. And so I kind of had a weird experience in that regard too, where I was meeting people in the community, but they didn't necessarily have a background of what we were doing. And so there was a disconnect where I was trying to explain that as the new employee, and it wasn't the best way to do it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is really critical that we still onboard our people in community spaces, in these events, and make them feel comfortable going into these events as representatives of the organization. Tell them what we want their role to be that day. Are we asking them to go meet with people, or do we want them to just sit back, relax, observe? Are we expecting them to be the brand new face? I mean, what is it that we're asking of people as a representative of this organization in these new spaces with our community? And that is a really critical thing that I think is really lost. I mean, I think the best way that I've seen it done, again, I can't believe how many compliments I'm throwing at the government today, federal government, but one of the things that they did really well is when we had these events, I went with somebody else. I was brand new, so I went with a senior person there, and my job, I was told, was to observe. You can meet people, of course. You say, I'm here, I'm new, great. Don't worry about anything else. You're just there to meet, shake hands, be friendly. That's it. Took a lot of pressure off of me, right? I knew that the person I was going with was going to be leading the charge. I knew that if a person came up, if one of our clients came up and asked them a question, they were handling it. I didn't have to pretend like I knew what I was talking about, because I certainly didn't in the first, few months of being there. And it just made me feel so much more at ease. And it also meant that I wasn't making mistakes in the community that could have repercussions down the line, because I didn't have to, again, put on this sort of facade of being an expert in something that I wasn't an expert. Was I a lawyer? Yes. But did I know the organization? No. So I think it's just such an important question, because it's about making sure that the community feels respected enough that we're not trying to pull one over them, that this is a new person and they're here to learn and meet you, but that they are new, and that's okay. And it's also not about shaming the person for being new. That's another thing too that I think is important to refrain from as an employer, or a mentor, whomever, is saying like, this person's brand new, so don't worry, don't worry about them, they don't know anything. Like there's a way of doing it that works, and there's a way of doing it that makes somebody feel kind of small at the same time. So that balance might be hard, but I think it is really critical that it's addressed, that when you go into those community spaces, this is what you need to do or not do, and this is what we're going to do for you when you get into those situations.
Understanding the role, the relationship, the what's expected of you, and on the flip side of that, the community then feeling respected, feeling included, feeling like they're being centered, like they're important in that process. What else can the onboarding of a new employee make possible for the community? I mean, there's something there in my mind about just making sure that the onboarding process emphasizes community, because that's a huge difference in the business world versus the nonprofit world, is that our entire reason for being is community. So there's something there just at a very, very basic level that makes possible for the community. Is just, we were talking before about getting re-energized as a new employee comes in, around the why. Around, Dimitri was talking about reintroducing, remembering, here's what our mission is. That's right. Here's why we're here. And that it's about community. What else can that onboarding process make possible for the people that are benefiting from the organization?
I think that gives them a chance to express how they see things and give their feedback as a new person comes in, right? They can listen and find out what people think, and integrate that into their sort of thinking and planning going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they bring a community with them too that needs to be introduced and kind of figure out where it fits in to the picture, right? The new person isn't coming from a vacuum, and we need to look at how, we're not going to ask them, you got to leave all of that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so struck earlier, John, by your going to that postal service in service at a very, very young age, about what it means to be a young Black person in a world where you're first coming up in your first jobs, and what that means. I'm just thinking about, I hate to do the trite representation matters thing, but we're all part of a community. What you just said. We all come from. I was sitting. I start my day at a cafe every morning, and I was sitting with one of the regulars the other day, and he was just pulling his hair out about what's going on in Palestine, and he looked at me and he said, "Now you're Jewish, right?" And I said, "Yeah." and he wanted to talk about a Jewish person's perspective on Palestine. Am I representing Jews everywhere? No. But there's just this moment of bringing who you are into community, lets the community identify with a person depending on who they are. Depending on who they are. You know, I hate to go back to the ridiculous movie that we watched this weekend, but the four drag queens wind up in this biker bar by mistake. They're obviously, you know, the beauty of movies to put people in situations where they're completely fish out of water. And of course, all the bikers are mean and vicious and blah, 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 blah. Except the ones who are vampires, and then there are vampires who are, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. But a gay man and a lesbian woman come to see the drag show in the middle of this whole biker thing because they felt seen. Because they were, oh, my peeps are here. I'm never able to come in here, but my peeps are here. I think there's something really powerful in that, John. I think there's something really
I
powerful.
never thought you'd be getting lessons.
I get lessons out of everything, honey. Show me drag queens and vampires, and I'm good.
Hey, David Graeber has a whole essay about how science fiction can help us imagine better futures. So, because
Well, if it
from
comes
that.
from David Graeber, that's to my heart. That's to my heart. We are a little bit less than 10 minutes out, and so let's all take a deep breath, remembering to breathe out. And if you took any notes, if you want to circle anything that stands out to you in your notes, there's something that's alive for you in your mind. What is standing out to you from our conversation today? And I'll do one, which is just, I'm really, really glad you could be here, even just for a little bit, Angie. Carl.
A theme of these conversations is, and this is an obvious thing to say, is that you can do things differently. We shouldn't just accept that, like, just there is just one way of doing things. And I think what we always seem to unearth from these conversations is that you can do things differently, and treating people as human beings, always sort of trying to do things that enhance their dignity rather than take it away, is a way that you can do things. And I don't think that's very profound, but I mean, as we said before, I mean, it's surprising how many of our processes and the ways that we employ people and so on is that it doesn't seem to sort of be designed to enhance their dignity. It's not relational, it's transactional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading a paper this weekend on social economy, and there was just one line in it that just grabbed me, and it was that we need to move away from the culture that says people exist to serve the economy rather than the economy existing to serve the people. And that whole thing about, you know, are we working with dignity? Are we working, you know, why that whole transactional relationship that you're pointing to, Carl, you know, which matters most? It's the people. Yeah. Justin.
Well, I think along that, and I think Shantine, a lot of the theme and some of the things you were talking about was how the organization is orienting to the person, as opposed to then I think this goes to what Carl was saying too, which is that there is an obligation for the entity to determine how the new person is orienting them, as opposed to just, you know, bringing someone up to speed to work. Like, that's not what this is about. It's actually about the relationship and the necessity to be malleable on both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shantine.
Yeah, you know, there's so many things said today that had this effect of shooting me back into a job that was very hard and that a lot of it I didn't love, but we had wonderful people working there. And when I look back, I can see now that when I envision this onboarding process and how we treat people, it's kind of looking at the end result and then going back from there. Where did I work where the people were wonderful, that I was around brilliant minds who all brought aspects of their cultures that were appreciated, and or at least we tried to do that. And how did we get there? And that's what kind of brought me back to the hiring process that actually was done very well. And I think the notion that I'm taking away from it is that when we learn so much from the mistakes that we made, of course, but sometimes we also really learn from what was successful, which seems very obvious to say. But what's interesting is just because the job itself or the boss that I had wasn't great at a lot of other things, they were really good at hiring. And I think that's because they looked at creating that culture and creating the type of workforce that we thought was going to be really good and really good together. And that was true. Even though other things didn't go well, there was so much effort and time put into hiring people that were going to en masse, like as a whole, work well together. And it wasn't looking at individuals who were going to work well and do their job well, because that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily make the workspace a good place. It doesn't necessarily propel the organization forward. So it's also about looking at that. It's holistic. It's how does this person fit in, but also how are they going to move us forward, which is a lot of what everyone's talked about. But I think that if there's always something in the back of the mind thinking, how does this person fit in and create the type of place that we all want to be in, that is really going to get us to where we want to be as an organization, as opposed to, does this person have a very special set of skills that might be useful as a widget or as a tool. When we keep that holistic perspective in mind, you're going to set people up for success. And even all these years later, when I look back and I say there was so much wrong with that job, I cannot fault the hiring because I have lifelong friends from that experience, from being in the trenches too. I mean, that's another thing. You're creating people who can be in the trenches together and who can be successful when it's hard and when it's good. But when it's hard, if we do that right, then it's going to be great. It's going to be successful. And I think that's what I'm taking away from this, is just keeping community in mind as a whole, the community, the organization, and outside of that.
Beautiful. Yes. John, how about you?
It's going to be an ongoing process. I think that's what I'm going to say. That every time a new person comes on board, every time a new project comes on board, every time you decide that you want to put a new initiative in place, you're going to have to go back through this process. You can't abandon the orientation process. You have to re-bring people to it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yes. Angie, any thoughts?
No, sorry I was so late, but I really enjoyed the 30 minutes that I was here.
I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you were here. How about you, Dimitri?
Now, I mentioned my awesome about seeing grandkids. And I've been thinking a lot about how the adding of this individual, onboarding of this new individual into the family, changes the dynamic of that family. Obviously, they, as the child comes in, they have a role to fill. They're a child, so they get certain benefits and they get certain dispensations. But overall, the parents change, the grandparents change, everybody changes as a result of this new person that has entered that community, the community of the family and the extended families and whatever. So I think about it in that context. That it's, and I mentioned the idea of a widget early on, and that's kind of what I'm leaving with, is that, you know, people aren't widgets, and job descriptions aren't the square hole that the peg is supposed to fit into. It's a lot more complicated than that. And you know, what you were just saying, Shantine, I remember work experiences which were really horrendous, but I loved the people I was working with, and I probably learned a lot more in those experiences than I would have by reading the manual, you know, whatever that meant. So I'm just sort of thinking about it in terms of a kind of a family lens as we talk about this.
Yeah, that's a brilliant analogy. That's a brilliant analogy. I, what I'm just feeling is this overall sense that the conversations that we've had over the past couple of months, that we're going to put together a really kick-ass process that is immensely human-centered for all the humans. That it's not just human-centered for the person that will be interviewing and bringing on board. It'll be human-centered for all of us and for our community. And there's just something, I mean, it's neat to talk about all of these processes through a lens of possibility rather than a lens of how badly it sucks. And what we hear all the time is how badly it sucks. And it just feels really good to talk about this through a lens of possibility. So I'm grateful to all of you, and we'll see you next month, July 8th.